A second person has died in a Miramar triple shooting that happened over the 4th of July holiday. Tonight, the family of the two victims speaking out for the first time about their devastating loss and who these individuals really were.
"3 days. Sometimes that's the difference between attempted murder and homicide. For 3 days, Arthur Lee Johnson III, known to everyone as AJ, fought for his life inside a South Florida hospital. Doctors worked. His family waited. Every phone call carried hope that he would somehow survive the attack that had already taken the life of his cousin, Brianna Johnson. Then, on July 8th, that hope disappeared. AJ died from the injuries he suffered during the shooting. Just like that, investigators weren't looking at a shooting that claimed one life. They were investigating a double homicide. And in many ways, that changed everything. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe to Psychology of Crime and turn on notifications. On this channel, we don't just follow the evidence. We explore the human behavior behind it. Every case reminds us that behind every headline are real families still waiting for answers. When AJ died, something else happened that many people don't immediately think about. The investigation lost a voice. Every victim carries memories that no detective, no surveillance camera, and no forensic report can ever fully replace. If AJ had seen something inside that Lamborghini, if he recognized a face, remembered a voice, or noticed something in the moments before the gunfire, those memories now became inaccessible forever. That leaves investigators relying even more heavily on physical evidence, surveillance footage, digital records, and the only surviving occupant of the vehicle. In criminal investigations, that's one of the quiet tragedies people rarely talk about. Evidence can be collected, phones can be analyzed, security cameras can be reviewed frame by frame, but a memory disappears when the person who carries it doesn't survive. As investigators continued piecing together the timeline, another development began attracting attention online. Someone who had been with Brianna and the group earlier that evening finally decided to speak publicly. The hairstylist. For days, her name had circulated across Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and countless comment sections. People were asking where she had been, what she knew, and why she hadn't spoken sooner. Eventually, she broke her silence. In a lengthy public statement, she tried to explain what happened from her perspective. According to her account, the night began as a celebration. The group attended a birthday party before later heading to Kikun nightclub. Nothing about those early hours suggested that the night would end in tragedy. She also described earlier tensions involving people connected to the group, but said she believed those issues had already been settled. From her point of view, whatever conflict had existed seemed to be over. Looking back now, that's one of the most unsettling aspects of this case. Human beings naturally assume that when an argument appears to end, the danger has passed. Most of the time, that's true. But criminal behavior doesn't always follow the emotional timeline of everyone involved. Sometimes one person believes the conflict is over, while another has already decided it isn't. And that difference in perception can become the space where tragedy unfolds. The hairstylist's statement didn't answer every question. In many ways, it created new ones. Not because she claimed to know who pulled the trigger. She didn't. Not because she identified a suspect. She didn't do that either. What her statement did was something much more important. It filled in some of the missing hours before the shooting. According to her account, after leaving the birthday celebration, the group eventually made their way to Kikun nightclub. Like most nights out, people came and went. Friends talked. Music played. Nothing, at least from her perspective, suggested that the night was about to spiral into one of the most talked about crimes in South Florida. Then she described something investigators would almost certainly pay attention to. She said there had been an earlier altercation involving people connected to the group, but she believed it had already been resolved. That detail deserves a closer look. One of the biggest mistakes people make after violent crimes is assuming that when a confrontation ends publicly, it also ends privately. It doesn't always work that way. Behaviorally, conflict often follows two completely different timelines. There's a visible timeline, the argument everyone sees. Then there's a psychological timeline, the one happening inside someone's mind. One person may walk away believing everything has been settled. Another may walk away replaying the argument over and over, allowing resentment to grow. Investigators know this. That's why they don't just ask whether people fought. They ask what happened afterward. Who left first? Who stayed behind? Who seemed unusually angry? Who made phone calls? Who suddenly disappeared? Sometimes the most important behavior isn't the confrontation itself. It's everything that follows. According to the hairstylist, she eventually left the group before the shooting occurred. That point is significant because it places her outside the Lamborghini before the attack happened. From that moment forward, her knowledge of the shooting itself becomes limited to what she learned afterward, just like everyone else. But then she addressed another issue that had already exploded across social media. She admitted that, in the confusion after the shooting, she gave Brianna's family the wrong name while trying to figure out what had happened herself. Later, she publicly apologized. That admission quickly became another topic of debate online. Some people viewed it as suspicious. Others saw it as a mistake of someone caught in the middle of an unfolding tragedy. The reality is that traumatic events often create confusion long before they create clarity. Immediately after violence, information spreads faster than facts. People hear names. They repeat rumors. Someone says they heard something. Another person treats that rumor as confirmation. Within hours, misinformation begins moving almost as quickly as the actual investigation. That's why detectives rarely rely on the first version of events they hear. They compare statements, review surveillance footage, analyze digital evidence, and slowly separate memory from assumption. Perhaps the most important part of the hairstylist statement came when she shared her own interpretation of what happened that morning. She said she believed AJ may have been the intended target. Notice the wording. She didn't present it as something police had confirmed. She shared it as her personal belief based on what she knew. That's an important distinction. In high-profile investigations, the people closest to a case often develop their own theories. Some eventually prove accurate. Others don't. The role of investigators isn't to accept or reject those beliefs immediately. It's to test them against the evidence. And in this case, the evidence was still being collected. If the hairstylist statement answered one question, it also introduced another. Why would she believe AJ was the intended target? Again, it's important to be precise here. This was her interpretation of the events, not a conclusion announced by investigators. As of this point in the investigation, police have not publicly confirmed who, if anyone, was specifically targeted. But her perspective is still worth examining because it raises an important behavioral question. How do investigators determine whether a shooting was directed at one specific person or at an entire group? They don't start with opinions. They start with patterns. They examine where everyone was sitting inside the vehicle. They study the trajectory of the bullets. They analyze surveillance footage frame by frame. They compare witness statements with forensic evidence. If shell casings, bullet paths, and vehicle damage consistently point toward one occupant, investigators may begin considering whether that person was a primary target. If the gunfire appears indiscriminate, the picture changes completely. That's why detectives rarely rush to answer the question everyone else is asking, because the evidence has to speak louder than assumptions. One thing we do know is that Miramar police have consistently described the attack as targeted. That statement alone tells us investigators don't believe this was random violence. Someone, for reasons still unknown, appears to have chosen that Lamborghini. But choosing a vehicle isn't necessarily the same as choosing one individual inside it. That's a distinction worth remembering. As the investigation continued, another heartbreaking development changed the entire direction of the case. AJ, who had been fighting for his life since the shooting, succumbed to his injuries. With his death, what had been a homicide and an attempted murder investigation officially became a double homicide. Legally, that's a major shift. Psychologically, it's an even heavier one. For Brianna's family, the pain was already unimaginable. For AJ's family, hope disappeared after 3 agonizing days of waiting. And for investigators, another victim meant another voice had been permanently lost. People often think of witnesses as those standing outside the crime scene, but Sometimes, the most important witness is also a victim. If AJ noticed something in the seconds before the shooting, if he recognized a vehicle, if he recognized a face, if he remembered hearing a name, those memories may never be fully known. That's one of the cruel realities of violent crime. Evidence tells investigators what happened. People tell investigators why. When a victim dies, those answers sometimes disappear with them. Now imagine being the only surviving person inside that Lamborghini. Reports indicated that the third occupant suffered severe injuries as well. Suddenly, the burden of memory rests almost entirely on one survivor. That's an extraordinary amount of pressure. Not only are you trying to recover physically, you're also carrying information that could become critical to solving the case. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, social media continued doing what social media often does. Theories multiplied. Names were shared. Rumors spread faster than verified information. Some people spoke with complete confidence about motives they couldn't possibly know. Others claimed to have inside information. Very little of it came from law enforcement. This is where investigations often become most vulnerable, not because detectives stop working, but because public speculation begins filling every gap before evidence has a chance to. And once a rumor takes hold, correcting it becomes far more difficult than starting with the truth in the first place. As this case continues to unfold, one thing becomes increasingly clear. There are really two investigations happening at the same time. The first belongs to the detectives. It's built on surveillance footage, forensic evidence, witness interviews, cell phone data, and facts that can be proven in court. The second investigation is happening online. It's built on screenshots, rumors, live streams, comment sections, and theories that can travel around the world before investigators have even finished processing a crime scene. The difference between those two investigations matters, because one is searching for evidence. The other is often searching for certainty. Human beings don't like unanswered questions. When something shocking happens, our brains instinctively begin looking for patterns. We want a motive. We want a suspect. We want a reason that makes the tragedy feel understandable. Sometimes that search for certainty becomes so powerful that people begin treating possibilities as facts. That's exactly why investigators repeatedly urge the public to avoid jumping to conclusions before the evidence is complete. In the days following the shooting, countless theories circulated online. Some focused on a Lamborghini. Others focused on the earlier altercation. Still others pointed fingers at people who had simply been around Brianna and AJ that night. But as of now, detectives have not publicly identified a suspect or announced a motive. That doesn't mean they aren't making progress. It simply means real investigations move differently than social media. Evidence takes time. Forensic testing takes time. Interviews take time. And building a case that can survive inside a courtroom, not just inside a comment section, takes even longer. Perhaps one of the biggest lessons from this case is how quickly a person's life can be rewritten by public opinion. Within days of the shooting, AJ's father found himself publicly defending his son's character against rumors that he said were completely false. At nearly the same time, the hairstylist felt compelled to release a lengthy public statement after finding herself pulled into online speculation. Neither of them asked to become part of a national conversation. They became part of it because the crime itself demanded answers that no one yet had. That's another psychological reality of high-profile investigations. When information is limited, people often begin assigning meaning to whatever information is available. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're completely wrong. And sometimes innocent people find themselves carrying the weight of accusations they never expected. As frustrating as it may be, uncertainty is part of nearly every major criminal investigation. The hardest answer to accept is often the most honest one. We don't know yet. But we don't know yet doesn't mean we'll never know. It means investigators are still separating evidence from assumption. As we close this chapter, we're left with a case that has only become more heartbreaking. A young woman lost her life. 3 days later, her cousin died from his injuries. One survivor remains. Families are grieving. Friends are searching for answers. And detectives continue working to determine exactly who is responsible and why. Until those answers come, Perhaps the most important thing we can do is resist the temptation to fill the silence with certainty that doesn't yet exist. So, let me leave you with this. If the hairstylist is correct in believing AJ was the intended target, what kind of evidence do you think investigators would need before reaching that same conclusion? Or do you believe the evidence may eventually point in a completely different direction? More importantly, what does this case teach us about the dangers of letting rumors spread faster than verified facts? I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts. Leave your perspective in the comments, but remember to keep the discussion respectful. These aren't fictional characters. They're real people with families still waiting for justice. If you enjoy true crime that goes beyond the headlines and explores both the evidence and the human behavior behind it, subscribe to Psychology of Crime and turn on the notification bell. As this investigation develops, we'll continue examining every verified update with the facts, the psychology, and the context needed to understand what really happened. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, every crime begins with choice, but every investigation begins with the truth.